Hello and welcome to another pre-recorded session of the IEEE International Symposium on Digital Privacy and Social Media, being held in just a few hours' time from now in San Jose, California. It's already the 1st of August 2022, but if you're in town and feel like going to the coolest symposium in California, please go to the Marriott Hotel and you won't be disappointed. My name is Katina Michael and I'm the Executive Chair of the symposium. I'm joined today by a special guest and supporter, Dr. Roba Abbas, who is the IEEE Society on the Social Implications of Technologies Socio-Technical Systems Committee Chair. So great for you to be joining us today, Roba, and thank you so much for your support over the last 2 months of setting up the symposium.
Thank you so much, Katina.
Thanks so much, Roba, for helping us anchor so many of our pre-records and coming to the Q&A sessions and contributing your knowledge and your vision and so much more. We're seeing an interesting and passionate community that's beginning to form connections right in front of us. And it feels like with the great support of the IEEE Consumer Technology Society, we're really making some great inroads towards cooperation in this symposium.
You're quite right, Katina. It's been a real pleasure for me and a great experience watching things unfold.
It's pretty amazing, isn't it? And it's exactly what we aimed for, Roba. For a long time, we've collaborated on matters with respect to socio-technical design, co-design, and transdisciplinarity. And when they asked me to chair this event, I went back to what we do best. I reflected on our last 20 years of collaboration or so, and looked at how do we investigate research problems and treated this as another research problem, except we were putting together a symposium. Well, we know what happens when different stakeholders come together, and it's a rarity because most of the time, stakeholders are in polemics, but not at this event. We've somehow managed to create a conversation, and this isn't stakeholder consultation. We're not sort of asking questions of our stakeholders and extracting value, running away and writing up these research papers. But what we're trying to do is be caring and careful and beginning and curating a dialogue there. It's a symposium where we brought people to connect together, just as we have connected and our fellow collaborators have connected alongside us. And all of the stakeholders, I might add, have been willing to address what we've called together with the IEEE Consumer Technology Society, global pressing issues related to what we've always called the design and development of technologies, in this case, consumer technologies. So, Robert, today you're going to be talking about public interest technology and transdisciplinarity. And before I let you do that, I want to give a shout out to our patrons, if that's okay. I would like to thank TELUS for being our platinum patron. I would also like to thank for their gold patronage, the IEEE Digital Privacy Initiative, that's doing incredible work to raise the profile of privacy within the engineering domain. And last but not least, our silver patron, the Prototype Company, led by Darren Culbreth, who's been very generous in his support. We also thank the support staff at IEEE Society on the Social Implications of Technology, especially Terry Bookman. A big shout out to you for your help on social media. The IEEE CT SOC Santa Clara Valley section and the San Francisco Bay Area chapter. Roba, I might also add that you've just completed your sabbatical at Arizona State University as a visiting professor in the School for the Future of Innovation in Society. And it was a great pleasure to have you there and to solidify much of our research direction of the next 5 years, and your influence across the school was evident. I always learned so much from you personally and think you are a pioneer in the socio-technical co-design space. Now, you're presently at the University of Wollongong, where you've been since the beginning of your teaching and researching career, I should say research career. You're an academic program director in the School of Business with additional co-editing responsibilities in the IEEE Transactions on Technology and Society. And I could really go on and on about your achievements over the last 17 years in particular, but if I could say, we've done a lot of research together, which is why we've been anchoring these pre-records together and have backgrounds in industry. So we share that in common. And I think that's why we understand different stakeholders and where they're coming from and how to engage them.
Yes, Katina, I couldn't agree with you more. There's been such an emphasis within our team right from the beginning on the importance of stakeholder inclusivity and multi-stakeholder perspectives. And I think something to note in that regard is we've never really settled to just focus on the academic setting, but rather tried to address real-world social problems that are very much related to the theme of this symposium.
Well, Roba, I think it's over to us now. I mean, we've been asking others to present and others to do Q&A, and we've put ourselves on the spot this evening. I think we're all excited that in a few hours this event goes live. But let's start with preparing what we know best and what we've tried to really put forward in the literature.
Yes, I think that's a good idea. Thank you, Katina. We're delighted to be given this opportunity to present at the IEEE International Symposium on Digital Privacy and Social Media, and specifically on a theme or topic within our research portfolio, which is public interest technology and the link to transdisciplinary research and discussions. We would, however, at this point like to acknowledge some of our collaborators on this work: Professor Jeremy Pitt, Associate Professors M.G. Michael and Rob Nichols, and Professor Christine Paraxlis. And we'd also like to thank the team with whom we worked on a series of special issues on the theme of public interest technology, which we'll be referencing in this presentation. I would like to commence the presentation on the next slide by looking at briefly defining public interest technology, or PIT, really based on an editorial that Katina and I co-authored with Professor Jeremy Pitt. And while we acknowledge that numerous definitions of PIT, or public interest technology, exist, public interest technology refers essentially to exploiting technological potential in the interest of justice and in the public interest or the public good. And this necessarily requires engagement with diverse communities, so including technologists, academics, citizens, activists, and more. And what this requires is a multi-stakeholder approach, really, to appreciating the technological landscape in addition to the public policy setting, with respect specifically to the design and development of technology or complex socio-technical systems. Furthermore, PIT has a democratic and open socio-technical systems basis. And that term socio-technical, so the socio-technical lens, while beyond the scope of this presentation in terms of the theory itself, allows us to make a number of assumptions about how systems work, about systems objectives, the social, technical, and environmental elements relevant to a particular system, and the methodologies when we think about systems design or redesign. And these methodologies, as we perceive PIT, promote and demand the integration of lived experience as well as professional expertise in either technology or systems design and development processes. They also are concerned, these methodologies, with the lived experience of users, of citizens, of the individual. So as such, we can claim that PIT is very much a human-centered philosophy or a process. And on that particular note, we can therefore claim that PIT is a philosophy of design as well as an outcome. So you can have public interest technology as an outcome resulting from a socio-technical co-design process, as we'll soon see in the framework that we will propose here. And finally, in defining public interest technology, an important element is transdisciplinarity, which I think really ties to the theme of this symposium. That is, public interest technology as a philosophy and also as an outcome requires a transdisciplinary approach in which disciplinary boundaries are really dissolved in a manner that results in novel models, theories, and approaches. And with this on the next slide, with this multifaceted definition in mind, and based on insights derived from our projects over many years, we propose a socio-technical framework for public interest technology, which you can see on the slide, at the heart of which is the embedding of values in a process of socio-technical design or socio-technical co-design. This framework essentially provides us with an ecosystems perspective on transdisciplinary collaborations, and this can be used to inform design processes, as per the instance shown on your screen, to design technology in the public interest. The framework itself focuses on stakeholder inclusivity, on socio-technical co-design, as I mentioned previously, and on other participatory approaches or design processes, and is intended to be viewed and applied from a transdisciplinary perspective. And if we are to start at the top of this framework with an understanding of the technological landscape, we can then progress to the recognition or selection of application areas or an application area within a specific environmental context, including the regulatory, the political, and so on, after which we advocate for, as part of this framework, for a multi-stakeholder perspective and approach to socio-technical design and co-design, with an emphasis on a human-centered, values-based approach. And currently we are exploring how to operationalize this framework across a range of projects and across a range of contexts. And this socio-technical ecosystems framework is essentially the outcome of our team's work based on multi, inter, and transdisciplinary projects, where we have engaged for over a decade and a half in projects that exist at the intersection of 4 areas or themes, and they are society, inclusive of societal or social implications, technology, ethics, and regulation, specifically from a socio-technical theoretical lens and in view of the design implications. A key project on the following slide that was pivotal to the development of our socio-technical design framework for public interest technology was an Australian Research Council funded project. In fact, a transdisciplinary project that commenced in about 2007, 2008, and it was on the topic of location-based services regulation and was led by Katina. This project, a sample outcome of which is shown on the slide, involved engaging with operational and non-operational stakeholders from numerous disciplines and sectors. So from academia, from industry, from government, and other stakeholder groups, inclusive of users or members of the public or citizens. And much of our work into public interest technology has been informed by this project and other related projects since. For example, another related project on the following slide, one that refers to co-design in the biomedical engineering context. And this is an example of multidisciplinary work that was published in proceedings of the IEEE with colleagues in engineering, business, and information systems, in which we developed an ethically aligned co-design methodology. This methodology really seeks to augments existing engineering design processes to create a hybrid or a shared space to consider stakeholder collaboration and engagement, where end user risk, where vulnerability and ethical considerations in the context of robotics can be considered as precursors to the engineering design process, particularly in view of robotic capsule endoscopy. Our more recent work on artificial intelligence, machine learning, and convergence digitalization on the next slide builds on our public interest technology framework and socio-technical research to consider the digital business domain in view of a number of levels, in view essentially of the micro, the meso, and the macro level considerations, revealing some of the outcomes resulting from the complex dynamics at those respective levels. And these dynamics lead to unintended or undesirable consequences that are illustrated on your screen as an iceberg representation. Unintended consequences, as we'll see on the following slide, those consequences that highlight the need for socio-technical frameworks and co-design in the public interest can also be observed across a range of other contexts. In this particular example, we're looking at location services for the dementia community. In this work, we encourage the rethinking of existing design processes, where we focus on a collaborative approach to the co-design of location-based services and solutions, and by extension, the empowerment of the user, or in the context of dementia, the individual living with dementia. And these are just some examples that relate to the emergent socio-technical design framework for public interest technology. Our prior and current work within the IEEE has also encouraged the initial development and the subsequent improvement of the framework. For instance, in 2020, Katina and I chaired a conference titled the IEEE International Symposium on Technology and Society, which was dedicated to the theme of public interest technology. And the full proceedings are available, as can be seen on the left-hand side of the screen. The remaining items on the slide are the outcomes of this symposium, which were 3 special issues that dealt with various aspects relevant to public interest technology and the transdisciplinary philosophy, emphasizing a range of things. So they emphasize socio-technical design, the value of co-design processes, and also the need to shift from techno-economic models or paradigms to those that are in the public interest. We are also working across a range of other IEEE initiatives at the moment to explore from a variety of perspectives our public interest technology framework and transdisciplinarity in action. For instance, within the IEEE Society on the Social Implications of Technology, SSIT, we are forming a committee on socio-technical systems that is largely based on community building and have commenced numerous projects and completed a consultation phase with members of the community and of the committee. Katina and I also serve as editor-in-chief and co-editor, respectively, of the IEEE Transactions on Technology and Society. This is a transdisciplinary outlet of the IEEE in which we have an active call for papers that address some of the themes and topics mentioned today, among others. And another example initiative we were involved in and currently are doing some work around is with the IEEE Standards Association on Standard IEEE 2089 for an age-appropriate digital services framework based on the 5 rights principles for children. So next, what do these varied initiatives, the research, our previous industry experience and work within the IEEE tell us? Our frameworks and our outcomes essentially point to the need for a multi-stakeholder approach or multi-stakeholder approaches in the public interest with a solid socio-technical theoretical basis to inform the operationalization of some of those ideas that we've proposed and mentioned today. This requires us to orient our efforts toward a shared meaning that advocates for transdisciplinary dialogue from a global perspective and beyond the walls of academia. As such, we have developed our Public Interest Technology or PIT Colloquium series, which was led by Katina. And the Public Interest Technology Colloquium was launched in 2020, and we're currently into the 4th series. And I'll briefly describe the coverage of each series to date. So in Series 1, our initial series, this coincided with the launch or announcement of the Masters of Science in Public Interest Technology, which Katina worked on at Arizona State University. The emphasis of Series 1 was on values in technology and the role or use of by design strategies during technology design and development efforts. The link between public interest technology and responsible innovation was also explored, as were topics such as privacy, security, discrimination, and some of the undesirable consequences and potential techniques to overcome these undesirable consequences. And during the first series in 2020, we had seminars dedicated to COVID-19, specifically to technological responses to the pandemic outbreak. As we launched Series 2, we hosted pioneering and expert voices in public interest technology who presented on the significance of care, ethics, trust, and social issues. The value of storytelling and imagination using methodologies was also a feature of the second series, where we spoke to the importance of design research, co-design, co-production, self-organizing systems, multidisciplinary imaginations, futures, and transdisciplinarity. And there was also an emphasis on ethics and social implications in the context of, for instance, talking robots, conversational agents, cybernetics, artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, biomedical innovations, multi-agent systems, IP location services, and also transhumanism. And in our most recent series, Series 3, we explored what a global perspective of public interest technology looks like and means, asking questions such as, is there a shared understanding of public interest technology? And how can we bring disparate groups together in the practice of PIT, despite that different terminology is being utilised in a range of contexts and by diverse disciplines? And in Series 3, we heard many talks focusing on socio-technical integration research, right through to fundamental principles of responsible innovation, civic tech and beyond, including sessions focused on design approaches such as compassionate design, participatory design, problem-based learning, co-design, and design for change agents. We also had panels and other sessions that spoke to the tensions with respect to advanced technologies such as artificial intelligence and the public interest from an information systems perspective, for example, and another panel that focused on algorithmic bias and justice with respect to AI. The paradox of technological potential was also explored as part of Series 3. And now we are actually in the final stages of planning for our 4th series, which will emphasize innovation ecosystems, policy settings, highly integrative, basic and responsive, i.e. high bar research, a government perspective, multi-stakeholder approaches, and for the purposes of this symposium and explicitly, transdisciplinary approaches. Katina, I might hand over to you for a reflection on the first 3 series and your thoughts on Series 4 as we look to launch this series shortly.
It's quite an emotional thing to go back and reflect on what seems to be more than 3 years, Roba. It just reminds me of how much public interest technology requires people to keep building on the blocks and keep looking at those connections and keep looking at the complexity of the issues at hand. No one person, no one field has the answers to everything. And if we look back at the first series, it's really assembled in its guts and core by people at Arizona State University who put the public interest technology degree together, people like Eric Fisher, who have been known for responsible innovation studies across the world, and of course the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Responsible Innovation, people like Mahmoud Farouk at the Consortium for Science and Policy Outcomes that was there right at the beginning of these huge funded projects from the National Science Foundation, looking initially at the Human Genome Project and then much further in terms of emerging technologies. Bob Cook-Deegan, who worked and pioneered a lot of stuff at the Technology Assessment Office in the 80s. That's where Dave Gustin met Bob Cook-Deegan, a medical doctor, and things began to grow. And so when we look at the connections between people on Series 1 who presented for us so kindly, it all began somewhere. There was a catalyst somewhere. And of course, President Crow at Arizona State University was one of those people, right behind one of the foremost think tanks in the US, being CISPO, run out of Washington, DC. Dave Gustin has a lot of passion for public interest technology. And as soon as he decided that we would be going forward with a degree in that area, there was no stopping him because he could see the connections between public interest technology, responsible innovation, ethical, legal, social implications, the ELSI approach, and so much more. And then we had these wonderful international voices. One of them was yourself on co-designing in the public interest from the perspective that we had back in 2007 when we first began our bigger national competitive grant projects. Prior to that, of course, we were doing a lot of work in research, looking at various issues to do with security. But speaking of security, Elizabeth Graffy, an economist, also started to put in her perspectives with COVID, looking at COVID approaches, COVID solutions, COVID responses, technology in the public interest with respect to COVID and how that was being diffused into society. Athena Ektipis, also of ASU, looked at cooperation. And this is a thing that comes up again and again in transdisciplinarity and also socio-technical systems. You know, if you're not communicating or hardly communicating, then you're certainly not cooperating. And through her human generosity projects, there's a lot in there about how we could better coordinate in order to respond with better solutions. And then we had our testimonials from our pitch students, some of whom, actually a couple who have been presenting at the symposium, in Elma Hayrick and Toby Shorov, come and describe what they have felt in the first year of their studies in public interest technology. You know, there are a lot of naysayers who say, well, what's the difference between public interest tech and what the society on the social implications of tech have been doing? Well, it's different. You know, the public interest technology ethos and philosophy wasn't there. Yes, the term public interest was thrown around in the 1960s in so many different places in the West, but there was not this concept of technology in the public interest. We also had some underrepresented minority groups present. Taimur Gago presented on Traveling While Arab, and I thought that was one of the best presentations ever delivered at the colloquium. He had very diverse voices, and he really captured the spirit of complexity in culture, in regulation, in law, and movement, and freedom and rights. That was a highlight for me. And then we had, of course, the classic philosopher Michael Eldred, with the historian Pascal Zachary, and a whole bunch of other voices, sort of humanistic voices and political voices, Jacqueline Wernemont, Erin Twyford, and George Mikhail from the University of Wollongong. And then some first sprouting of the importance of engaging with third sector or smaller organizations. We had consultants Nathan Kinch and Matthew Mitka come and talk to us about their greater than learning vision, how to create perhaps a LinkedIn for industry so that they could mentor one another, and sort of knowledge is raised and awareness is raised about certain issues in a public way. Joseph Cavalco, always with wise words, world to mind, he said, mind to world. And Nicole Stevenson on privacy, but just an incredible first kickoff series that I think I'm quite nostalgic in recollecting, because we were throwing our curriculum together at the time. Of course, he had gone through all its paces for the last 18 months prior to that, but to see the colloquium come to life and the degree at the same time come to life, that was very special. In our second series, we continued on to look at emerging technologies and more specifically PIT values. And here I reached out with our fellow collaborators and tried to get some of those older voices and some of those fresh voices together. You know, you look back when you were a student once upon a time and you think to yourself, well, where did I gain my insights from? Who taught me? Who mentored me? And the great voices of Ronald Klein. I think his talk has been downloaded 600 or 700 times in less than 6 months, which is a lot for an academic talk. We had youthful voices like Jordan Miller, who's now Dr. Jordan Miller, looking at conversations with Mr. the Robot and looking at that mix, you know, the old with the new, sort of new technological emerging tech, and what they're sort of putting pressure on, you know, creating tensions in perhaps existing regulations and laws. We had a beautiful story by Diana Aiton-Schenker on the lived experience. She described an accident she was in and how that changed her whole academic approach to things, and what that meant for her when she walked away unscathed from what could have been a death-defying moment where her car literally span out of control. But she was able to really bridge the gap between the lived experience and the professional expertise. And her people who saved her on the day all had the same responses. They'd do that again for anyone if they could. But that was very much analogous and very much metaphorical, that talk, and teaches a lot about the emergence of lived experience and professional expertise. I look back also to Susie Josie Featherston, who directed many documentaries at Attitude Live in New Zealand. Susie's a renowned writer. She does treatments for very different media services, and Susie's directing of a particular In My Mind series, which looked at women, looked at mental health, and looked at social media, stands out for me as well. Susie took us on a 20-year journey of many of the documentaries she had put together and talked about stories and ideas we love. And she said basically the things that we love are usually those that we speak truth, and truth is a underlying concept throughout the whole PIT series. Mark Hurst, a brilliant consultant of Creative Good, a founder of that, an MIT graduate as well, talked to us very much about anecdotes in Customers Included and the importance of co-design. He talked about the, you know, lack of emphasis we should have on personas of all things, and looked at more detail about how we should go forward, allowing customers to participate in the design process. For him, a phrase that he talked about, we're not building for fake people, we're building for real people, and how do we include stakeholders in that design discussion. We also had the philosopher, Rafael Capiro, who's also an ethicist and spoke to us on AI. Rafael was actually responsible for an opinion piece and was an EU rapporteur back in around about the early 2010s. And Rafael was responsible with the late Rodota to actually put together an ICT implant opinion piece, which we still refer to back in 2005. And he was one of the key presenters at IEEE ISTAS 2010 in Wollongong, Australia. We also had William DeBars, who spoke to us about the importance of transdisciplinarity, co-production, and the public interest, and the legendary Professor Jeremy Pitt on his latest book on self-organizing multi-agent systems, one of the key voices internationally in this domain, someone we should listen to a lot more so we have a lot less problems, I think, in society at large with regards to technology. He's also the editor-in-chief of the IEEE Technology and Society magazine. We then had beautiful, youthful voices in Sherry Wasserman, who talked to us about socio-technical design and multidisciplinary imaginations, a very arty and creative approach to inquiry. And she talked to us also about her experiences in COVID. We had Rebecca Herold, Reese Farthing, and Emma Froh talk about the politics of care and young people's rights. And from a Latin American perspective, a PhD candidate in the School for the Future of Innovation in Society's Human and Social Dimensions of Technology PhD program, Martin Perez Comiso, looking at futures and technology. And of course, we can't forget the great Herman Tavani, someone you would think you could listen to every day, go on about ethics and information technology and technology more largely. He is a wonderful voice, and may he be healthy, and may all our speakers be healthy for a lot longer as they retire or semi-retire. I also enjoyed the talk by Diane Martin, somebody I met at the University of Technology, Sydney as an undergraduate student in my last year, and whom I kept in contact with sporadically and invited her to talk on transhumanism as a path to immortality. And she talked to us about Pinocchio and the positronic brain and started to look at the idea and the definitions of a person. Jemana Abugazela from Pivot for Humanity also talked to us about her creation, Zany, a chatbot, and the ROI of conversation. So much more on this, so many more things to talk about, but we'll move on in the consciousness of time. Our series 3, which was championed by yourself, Roba, was a wonderful, fresh look at how we could run the symposium. And there was a lot more predictability, perhaps, about the way we ran the sessions, although there were a lot of diverse stakeholders. We had, for the first time, large panels of 5 or 6 people looking at various perspectives on a common theme, which gave birth to many things outside the colloquium, many collaborations, many initiatives, and for that, we have you to thank for, Roba. We had Sid Harrell and Evangelia Emily Tavulareas talk to us about civic tech and their ideas. Eric Fisher came back to talk on socio-technical integration research, and Toby Shurov came back to talk on principles of public interest tech. But we had these fresh voices also, Kathy Treadaway from a completely different area on this notion of compassionate design and her specific background in creative work. And in her domain, she was looking at individuals living with Alzheimer's and dementia. We had other looks at participatory design by Alicia De Mesa and Matt Rogers on problem-based learning. Matt is a teacher at a traveling high school where students get to live the life within a cultural setting in situ regarding projects that they're given, and their projects are not one-dimensional, they're multi-dimensional or transdisciplinary in nature. So the students are engaged in real-world projects as they're going through their high school studies. Rob Nichols spoke on co-design and social networks. We had Design for Change from Maurizio Meyer, and we looked even at the Neurosys project with Mareke Smolka. In addition, we had Algorithmic Bias and Justice with Sharia actor Olivera Marinkovic and Patrick Mikolev, as well as a legendary final session on The Accidental Public Interest Technology by Jason Sargent, who gave us quite a different view of how to engage with this notion of PIT. It was a very visual view, a lot of metaphor, and really meta, as far as I was concerned, going to deep down into why someone actually engages in public interest tech. Again, Joseph Kavalko returned on the future of medicine, and Cherilyn Netkin gave a talk on social impact mindset. And somebody who's actually presenting at the symposium, The Great Irony of Technology, Pat Scannell, gave a talk which shows us that bridges are built over time. Connections are made over time. So series 1, 2, and 3, if we counted the number of people who are now talking at our symposium, it's quite a few of our speakers. In our 4th series launching in August 2022, we have a mixture of voices, but with a focus on transdisciplinarity. And this is where we're really going to start tying the dots together about public interest tech. Innovation ecosystems seems to be one of the main areas, with Elias Karayanis coming and talk to us about the quintuple and quadruple and innovation ecosystems. We've got citizen scientists, we've got individuals and researchers from the High Bar Research Alliance, led by Lorne Whitehead and Michelle Mossman, with work with Gretchen Jordan and William DeBars. Again, a return visit from William. And looking at the truth cinema and the celebration of complexity, Jay Mitchell Johnson is coming as a filmmaker from the US, now based out of Russia. And he'll be looking at complexity as reporting from a filmmaker's perspective. Kathleen Vogel, the interim director at the School for the Future of Innovation at ASU, will be talking on biomedical data hacking and the implications. Towards an Open Government, Maureen Jensen and Scarlett Wilcock and Andrew Whelan. And on allostatic overload, Christine Paraxlis will be giving a talk, and she'll be helping us host one of the sessions with Joseph Knoll on free access to information. Specialists in transdisciplinarity, including Mariana Zafarikopoulos and a professor from ANU as well, who will be talking to us, Gabriel Bama. And we've also got another legend, Professor Roger Clark, who's also spoken at the symposium, talking to us about multi-stakeholder risk assessment, alongside Marcus Wiggin on public service and policy. Probably, I think, Roba, you'd agree with me, the most transdisciplinary scholar that we know. So that's a bit of a wrap up, and I think I'll give the floor back to you.
Thank you, Katina. What a wonderful overview of the 3 series and also series 4. I think I might start tying the threads together and talk about next step and what this all means in terms of creating a forum for transdisciplinary research. So Katina, you probably agree that our research and the initiatives we've briefly mentioned today demonstrate the need for transdisciplinary discussions and for furthering those transdisciplinary discussions in order to enrich our understanding of various stakeholder perspectives or from various stakeholder perspectives. For instance, moving beyond the academic setting, developing models for industry engagement that transcend the dominant techno-economic paradigms, and also proposing frameworks that demonstrate transdisciplinarity and public interest technology in action. Models ideally that result in the emergence of new theories, methodologies, and approaches as a result of a process of socio-technical design, co-design, or engagement. And these models, as noted on the slide, must strive for a few things. The first is the representation of various relevant disciplines, and this is for the purpose, or with the purpose of providing an integrated view and seeking knowledge synthesis. And in doing so, building on and extending and or developing multi-stakeholder engagement frameworks, which we've mentioned a few times in this presentation, and models, and those models that can actually be operationalized. Now, these frameworks and models should ideally allow for the co-defining of a particular problem space, of the challenges, of system objectives toward that shared or unified view of a problem that we are seeking to address. And one approach that we are advocating for, and I'd like to end on this point before talking about the symposium, is for socio-technical co-design from a transdisciplinary perspective. And finally, on the following slide, the 2022 IEEE International Symposium on Digital Privacy and Social Media, which is on the theme of applying engineering solutions to a complex set of issues, we feel is a positive step toward creating a forum for these transdisciplinary discussions and discussions about the value of a socio-technical approach, the significance of working in the public interest, and so much more. And this is specifically the case given the representation we have at the symposium from industry, from government and academia, with individuals coming together for the purpose of dialogue regarding the issues, complexities, and state of consumer technologies. Our final thought is that through such transdisciplinary dialogue, we will be better placed to explore, to articulate, and to address some of the complex and contemporary societal challenges, and to do so in the public interest and in a human-centered fashion. On the next slide, for anyone who's interested in finding out more, please feel free to contact myself or Katina at the addresses provided on your slide. And before handing back to you, Katina, we would next like to thank our institutions, the University of Wollongong, Australia, and Arizona State University for their support of our work. Katina, back to you for some reflections and maybe some questions or discussion.
Well, it's quite a presentation and I've enjoyed listening. I do have some thoughts. I keep thinking about what we've presented and how it mirrors the symposium, but I'll hold back for a moment on that one. I have a question. You mentioned socio-technical co-design several times. How do you define this term and what's that about?
Great question, Katina. Yes, I did mention it a few times, didn't I? So the definition of socio-technical design that we've used here and that we use in our work, as you're well aware, Katina, and I think is of interest to anyone watching this, is really referring to a formal theory of design. And in the socio-technical approach, which originated in the 1950s in the Tavistock Institute in London, is essentially an organizational theory that is built on the premise of the composition of work systems at that particular time. So it's built on the premise that work systems are comprised of some social elements, some technical components, within an environmental context, that's an open systems basis, and that particular socio-technical system as a whole, its success as an open system is contingent on the degree in which those social and technical components, which, as you're aware, we refer to as subsystems, can be jointly optimized. Now, our team feels that the notion of optimization is something that needs redefining and a bit more work to account for current and complex systems, such as those tying to the theme of the symposium. But back to your question, Katina, socio-technical theory has been applied in a range of disciplines. So, for instance, disciplines that employ the theory include information systems, particularly within the context of complex systems. It's applied in sociology, in engineering, and in other domains, which makes it ideal for the purpose of articulating a particular system and then thinking about design. And on the topic of design, the theory provides design methodologies or approaches for operationalizing some of the core principles of socio-technical theory, which in the interest of time, I won't delve into, but we try to apply these core principles across multiple units of analysis. So we can think about interaction with systems, with technologies, at an individual level, at a work systems level, for example, at an industry level, at a societal level, and that makes it quite powerful. And when we combine this theory or these approaches and the application with the process of design, it can be quite powerful, Katina, in contexts such as in the public interest technology space or in the public interest technology context. And when we consider technologies, both existing and emerging, and the current and future modes of operation at those variety of levels. So it is a formal theory that we can utilize for conceptualizing, for designing, and that's how we define this term.
It's fascinating. A follow-on question, what do you mean by the socio-technical approach to design or to conceptualize innovation ecosystems? Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. So we did reference as part of our presentation the socio-technical approach to design in general, which is an approach that is in existence. We also referenced the socio-technical co-design concept as part of that broader innovation ecosystem, that public interest technology open ecosystem. the way that we think about that concept and what I mean by socio-technical co-design as we propose and define it in our work and as embedded within that public interest technology framework is something that we feel is quite novel in terms of what that design process looks like and means as supplementing or augmenting existing design processes. It is essentially as a definition about how we involve end users, but also beyond the end user, additional stakeholders in socio-technical system conceptualization, design and development efforts. So the conceptualization meaning how we look at the employment of enhanced or existing socio-technical design approaches to think about how the system looks like, the components of the system, its dynamics, how we map that out in order to then design and develop through a particular design partnership. So it's about the establishment of really a balanced design engagement with that purpose of addressing a problem. And as I mentioned previously as part of the presentation in terms of next step, it's about addressing a jointly defined or a co-defined problem. And that's something that really distinguishes the socio-technical co-design approach. So you've got this jointly defined problem or challenge, and then we're seeking to embed values that are identified by stakeholders in order to achieve a state of equilibrium. And that's something that we derive from open systems theory and that formalized theoretical basis that I spoke about in my response to the previous question. So we think what results in a steady system state or in that equilibrium toward the empowerment of stakeholders and toward serving the public interest, really. So I think about socio-technical co-design, and we've discussed this many times, we think about it as a human-centered approach. So we're thinking about centering the end user and the end user engagement, as well as the engagement of other stakeholders. It should be about a balanced approach to design in terms of the design partnership. It should be about, collaboratively defining and conceptualizing things. It's about embedding and acknowledging the role of principles, Katina, of ethics. We spoke about the example of the IEEE of standards as a precursor to design rather than a postscript to that process. It's also about so much more. I spoke to the idea of equilibrium, but at the heart of it is it's geared toward advancing human health, well-being and environmental sustainability. And we can use this within that socio-technical or innovation ecosystem for the purpose of serving the public interest.
I keep thinking how unique this is. I mean, obviously, companies and designers have been embracing an approach, something, obviously. But the uniqueness of this in bringing all the different bits and pieces together is something I haven't seen before. And I very much appreciate that when 2089 was created by the IEEE, we were on that working party committee. It was not really about replacing what industry had, but enhancing. And this is an important point. When we have dialogue, we can't have slugging matches with one another to say, what you're doing doesn't work and you don't do this, and so your design process is bad. There's no such thing as bad, I think, as just keep improving and keep enhancing. And I think some of the things that we've published in the last 3 years, especially, point to the ways we can conceptualize and operationalize, but also enhance what we're currently doing. So take the best things of what you do and layer it on top with all these other aspects, whether it's in the philosophical domain to begin with is one thing. At least you can get your engineers and your designers to think a certain way with a particular philosophical orientation, with a goal towards, and then actually in very concerted efforts, try and pick apart what you do and how you could enhance it. So there's some invaluable information you've put forward. I have one more question for you, although I have like 100 all the time. You mentioned briefly the SSIT technical committee that you're chairing on socio-technical systems. What's the primary purpose and focus of this committee, and can anyone join? How do you get involved in something like that?
Great question. Thank you, Katina. So in line with the aspects I spoke about theory, I guess the purpose of the SSIT Technical Committee on Socio-Technical System is is to try to bring together those aspects that we spoke about, the social, the technical, the environmental, in a meaningful way toward that transdisciplinary perspective within the context of both, Katina, existing and emerging technologies. So the primary purpose, although there are many objectives we wish to fulfill as part of this committee, the main purpose is to develop and sustain a transdisciplinary community of practice to enable transnational, transsector, also trans-institutional collaboration and knowledge transfer. So in terms of joining the committee, everyone is welcome to join. It is a community. It's not a community that's confined to the IEEE, but what we hope to do is to focus on a number of themes tied to that broader term of socio-technical systems. So to give you some examples, we'll be focusing on social implications of existing advanced, complex and emerging technologies. Our emphasis will be in line with what we presented today, socio-technical systems design and development methodologies, and that's something that might appeal to attendees at the symposium, particularly those from industry. As you rightly mentioned, how do we augment, how do we supplement existing processes in a meaningful fashion to allow us to acknowledge that we have these existing systems design processes and we need to work within them, but we still need to maintain that human-centeredness. We still need to advance transdisciplinary research in order to solve these large problems. So that's another theme. The theme of public interest technology is a core pillar to this technical committee will be a main area, as will information systems, ethics and regulation, responsible innovation. Katina, you talked to that as part of the work at ASU and those individuals who presented at our colloquium. So responsible innovation and systems. Something we'd really like to focus on are those co-design, participatory design and human-centered design approaches and methodologies. And again, we'd like to endeavour to look at transdisciplinarity, how we think about transdisciplinary approaches, bringing people together, not forgetting that we may need to, or we will acknowledge the multi and interdisciplinary spaces as well in doing so. We'll extend our focus to socio-technical innovations, socio-technical imaginaries, those levels that I spoke about as part of a recent editorial are those micro, meso, and macro considerations as linked to systems of innovations and complex socio-technical systems. And also there'll be themes such as privacy, trust, security and control that we'll be looking to emphasize and to work through as related to those other themes.
That sounds very exciting, to bring all that to the society and the social implications of technology. That's one of a number of technical committees that people could join and volunteer their time with. You know, Roba, I sort of love being in control of the interviewer's seat. It's a bit like being Davros on Doctor Who, but you may have questions for me. I'm not sure, maybe even one really hard one. I'm not sure. Do you have any questions for me?
I don't know about hard, Katina. I'll save those for a dedicated session. One thing I did want to note, Katina, is it's been quite phenomenal witnessing the organisation of this symposium and all the hard work that you've put in. And it's been really phenomenal witnessing your work and your work ethic over the past 17 years, and may there be many more. And I do appreciate how much planning this takes, how much planning transdisciplinary projects take. I'm interested to know, and I've been reflecting on this as we've been conversing and discussing the symposium. What are your hopes for this symposium? So you always have this vision, and that's something that, you know, was easy to identify in our collaborations. You always have this vision for particular initiatives beyond their primary purpose. What is your hope for this symposium? And I'd be interested to know if I get this one question, both for the event itself and post-event initiatives or outcomes.
You said this wasn't going to be hard, Roba Abbas.
I think it was like multiple questions in one question, just so I can get away with more than one.
So for the event, I want people to connect and meet, both those that are in person and those that are online, and those that hear about this. You know, we've had thousands and thousands of impressions since we began sharing things on LinkedIn over the last few months. Truth be known, we only really began to look at the program in earnest about 2 months ago. And so to get almost 50 speakers in 2 months during a time that's COVID ridden is really phenomenal, both from the volunteerism of the speakers' perspectives, but also getting people who are usually not on speaking terms together is something exceptional. And I think people know it's about time. They've got to start talking. You know, gone are the days where we know we're going to get away with things because we can. The issues are now visible. People have to work together. They're becoming increasingly complex, and even simple things seem hard during a COVID time. I think this is the time for cooperation. I think this event is going to spark a new discussion in transdisciplinarity. I think you've been behind that push for a while now, but this is only mirroring projects that we did when we first came out of industry. Nothing different, but the scale potentially is different. You know, we were looking at Australia, we were looking at regulation and telecommunications back in 2007, and now we're looking globally at a digital footprint that's global with over 1 billion users in any one particular app. And these organizations need support. You know, they exist, they offer great services. Sometimes they're misused, other times they're abused knowingly. Sometimes there's distrust for no reason, and other times mistrust. And sometimes there's fake news, and sometimes there's overload. People have had too much and they can't tolerate it anymore. We need to find, as you said, that equilibrium or that harmony in our society, because right now the balances are tipping in different directions. You know, it's not just one, it's not like a seesaw now. We've got like many seesaws on a compass almost, and they're all going at once, and no one's got their balance, and they feel like you're going to fall off or that you're stuck downwards or upwards, you know, wherever you are. And so this is really hard to calibrate. It's like a circadian rhythm. You know, we've got 6 clocks in the body. You try and figure them out when they're out of whack. It takes time. And so that's what I think we're going through. All these different communities, they're all doing their own thing. And now we're trying to get those circadian rhythms to work together. It's like a human body, another system. But the question is, where are we going to go from here? Well, one is a hope that we can have a dialogue again next year, but not wait for 12 months to start that dialogue again. And in fact, we haven't really begun it. It's been around now for a while. We've had wonderful advocates like Anne Kavukian and Professor Roger Clark and Professor Marcus Wiggin leading the charge for so many years, you know, part of different third sector organizations and part of a government in the case of Anne Kavukian. So the conversation has been there. It's in the literature, but now we're trying to continue it and give new life to it. And unfortunately, in recent times, there's been a lot of ethics washing, public interest technology washing. You know, we do ethics, we're taking values into consideration, we pay lip service to co-design, that's okay, we can move on. Actually, it's not okay. This is the time we have to shift gears. This is the time, as Jemana Abugazela said in her pre-record, to reimagine. These are deep things embedded in futures thinking and socio-technical imaginaries. And it's time. So post this event, we've already spoken to the delegates and presenters to contribute 2-page statements, something small. Where does your organization stand in this? Where does your community stakeholders stand in this? What do they want more of? What do they need less of? How can we all support each other? And that's a complex thing in itself. Collaboration takes time, energy, commitment, honor, respect, dignity, freedom, all of these things that we've lived as a team in our group, but now we're trying to see these at different scales, as you said, the micro, the meso, and the macro. And how does that infiltrate up and infiltrate down? And what are some of those tangible outcomes? You know, we're going to create through this group new methodological responses to how you garner perspectives from citizenry and consumers. It's not about observing them and extracting value, but more about design justice approaches, something that provides value back to the end user to rebalance that which they've lost. Somehow, as Nicole Stevenson pointed to, the big tech giants recalibrating with everyday people, and for everyone to feel like a giant and be heard at the same level. And that takes a lot of effort. It also takes engineers to be less prideful based on the knowledge that they've gained through these developments, and to come back down to the level. And I don't mean down in a derogatory way, but in a way that says, here are the everyday problems that people are living with. How can we respond to them? Not just those big epic engineering problems that are really computationally taxing and mathematically, in a modeling sense, complex. But how do we get to those conversations that people have at swimming lessons? You know, mums and dads usually have at swimming lessons, or that, you know, you have while you're waiting to pick up your child in the afternoon. they're the most important conversations that shed light on where people require assistance. And that's what I'm hoping, that we get a little bit more real, that we start to incorporate different stakeholder types into the conversation, and that conversation doesn't just stop. You know, it's like when people tell me they're from a particular religious orientation, and they do their thing, and they go to the place of worship on the weekend or on this day at this time, and the rest of the week, well, forget about it. But that's not what it's about. It's about ongoing commitment over time. And I hope that the stakeholders who come hear something new. I think you called them ideas recently. They adopt them, they think about them further, and then they try to do something about them in the real life setting. And that's not easy when you go to work, as we know, because we've been in industry. And you said, you know, first of all, to speak up and say something, and secondly, to be mindful how it will be incorporated in the right language. So you're translating yet again something that seems far-fetched for an organization that's moving from one, you know, next to the next product development. And here you are suggesting something that may seemingly slow things down. Well, who slows down these days? And what a huge effort it is to slow down just a little bit to allow the other person to catch up. It's not easy. So that's probably a long-winded way of saying that's a really hard question, and we've got a lot of work to do. But any final thoughts from you, Roba?
No, I think you're quite right, Katina, in that this is complex. So while it's seemingly at a theoretical level, seems like the right thing to do, the ideal scenario, perhaps, it's quite interesting when you try to operationalize that and think about things in practice. Very well said. I love where you're taking this, where we're taking this, and may this be the beginning and also a continuation of existing dialogue across disciplines, across sectors, and hopefully emerging from this process are these novel methodologies, approaches, and ideas that we can actually work with toward that vision that you just mentioned, and in the interest of the public, of the stakeholders, and utilizing that multi-stakeholder perspective. But I think that's a wrap, and it's over to you for closing.
Did you just call it a wrap? No, we've got hours to go. The symposium's about to start. No, well, if you've enjoyed this conversation, we've been spoiled by working on this one together with Dr. Roba Abbas. We feel spoiled, don't we, to have this opportunity to communicate to our audience. This is probably the last time we're going to say this time around. Thank you for your participation and listening and sharing in the IEEE International Symposium on Digital Privacy and Social Media 2022. If you'd like to find out more about the societies we work with and belong to, why not click on one of these URLs, the IEEE Consumer Technology Society, get involved in the IEEE Digital Privacy Initiative, and the IEEE Society on the Social Implications of Technology in its Jubilee year, and the IEEE Future Directions Committee. And Dr. Roba Abbas, thank you for your smarts and your energy and your support. How would you like to close this? How do we do it, with a gong, or how would we do it?
I think I'll leave that one to you, Katina.
Okay, are we ready on the count of three? 1, 2, 3. Dong, dong. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.